You see these two focaccias? They're made out of the same batch of dough, but one is flat and the other one is puffy. Wanna know why? Then stick around, because in this video we'll address all the whys of yeast bread to get you to make amazing bread at home. The kind of bread that you get from bakeries with lines out the door and around the block. Yeah, but at home. We'll also address all the rookie mistakes and get you baking fabulous bread in no time. The first rookie mistake is using measuring cups. Make sure you're weighing your ingredients. I have a video linked below that explains why and how to do that. It's the most important thing you can do to improve all your baking. Let's go through all the ingredients. I use King Arthur unbleached all-purpose flour. It has a protein content of 11.7%. That's extremely high for an unbleached all-purpose flour and is as close to bread flour as you can get. The protein content in other brands will be somewhat different and probably lower. If you can't get King Arthur flour, use any unbleached all-purpose flour the first time around. If you are not getting enough holes and chew, try replacing part of all-purpose flour with bread flour until you get desirable results. In case you're wondering, why don't we just go with bread flour in the first place? Here is why. Bread flour has insanely high protein content. King Arthur bread flour is 12.7%. The higher this number, the more potential your dough has for acting like a very stiff rubber band and developing huge but uneven holes after baking. Shaping a flat bread like focaccia out of bread flour doesn't work very well. The dough keeps shrinking back and refuses to stay flat. And I know holes are awesome. I mean, come on, if you don't have a hole fetish, you are not a serious bread baker. But we can get more even, perfectly lovely holes with unbleached all-purpose if we use the right amount of water and effective kneading technique. Although it is optional, I replace 11% of my all-purpose flour with whole wheat flour in most of my breads, including focaccia. Not because of healthiness, but because of pleasant nutty toasty aroma. If you don't want to buy another type of flour, just replace it with more all-purpose. By the way, unless you will use it in 3 months, store your whole wheat flour in the freezer so that it doesn't go rancid. For all-purpose flour, you have a year of room temperature storage. The next major ingredient is water. Tap water is perfectly fine. Everything you've heard about water being responsible for New York pizza or any other bread is complete BS. The only important thing about water is that it is the right temperature. For this dough, we need it to be around 70 to 80 Fahrenheit. Thermometer would be best, but if you don't have one, it should feel like pool water, not a hot tub. The next rookie mistake is using yeast that you found in the back of your cabinet from 3 years ago. If your yeast wasn't refrigerated, or better yet, frozen immediately after opening, and if you didn't write the opening date on it, go buy new yeast. Instant yeast lasts in the fridge in an airtight container for a couple of years and even longer in the freezer. Active dry is way less predictable, but it should last about 6 months as long as you keep it cold. I store some of my yeast in the jar in the fridge and freeze the rest in an airtight container. Yeast gives people heebie-jeebies, and I am planning to make a whole video about it. But here is the gist. For this recipe, you can use either instant yeast or active dry yeast. 1 teaspoon of instant equals 1 1/4 teaspoons of active dry. And there is no need to change the procedure. You can use these yeasts exactly the same way. In case you're wondering, I'm using SAF instant yeast. The next rookie mistake is not measuring salt accurately. It has a huge impact on flavor, but also on the color of the crust. Unsalted bread comes out pale. If you want an extreme example of this albino bread, go to Tuscany sometimes. Their classic loaves are completely pale and taste as bad as they look because of skipping salt in the dough. Yes, I just insulted Tuscan bread. Yes, you are welcome to unsubscribe. The weight measurement won't change with the salt type. If you're measuring by volume with teaspoons, the volume measurement will change tremendously from brand to brand because of different crystal shape, size, and density. I use a tiny bit of honey in most of my breads, including focaccia. You can replace it with sugar or skip it entirely. Okay, that's all the ingredients. Let's make the dough. I'll be using a stand mixer in this video, but I'll release a follow-up video next week with how to knead a wet dough like this one by hand. Put the bowl of a stand mixer on the scale and zero it out. Add 316 grams of room temperature water, 1 teaspoon of instant yeast, and 8 grams of honey. Take the bowl off the scale and whisk all the ingredients until the yeast is completely dissolved. Put the bowl back on the scale and zero it out. Add 400 grams of unbleached all-purpose flour, 50 grams of whole wheat flour, and 4 teaspoons of Diamond Crystal Kosher Salt or 2 teaspoons of table salt. Mix with a hook until the dough forms on low speed. You're probably wondering why I put the wet ingredients into the bowl first. Shouldn't the dry always go on the bottom? I've tried it both ways and found that starting with the wet allows me to use the dough hook immediately. When I started with dry first, not all mixers could handle that with the dough hook, and some required starting with a pedal attachment to bring the ingredients together and then switch to the dough hook to knead. I find that attachment switching to be a pain in the ass, and it turns out completely unnecessary if you start with wet ingredients on the bottom. So that's what I do. If you're making the dough by hand, you do need to stick with the traditional dry ingredients first and use the well method. But more about that next week. When all the dry flour is absorbed, scrape the sides of the bowl and start kneading. We'll do 3 minutes on low speed. Don't be surprised if during this stage the dough is sticking to the bottom a lot. The next step will depend on what mixer you have. If your mixer has a C-hook, like a KitchenAid Classic or Artisan, you'll need to scrape down the bowl and flip the dough upside down after the first 3 minutes of kneading because C-hooks don't knead evenly. This step is annoying, but it's crucial to proper gluten development. It would be easier if I unhooked the bowl, but I didn't want to move my camera. If you have a KitchenAid Pro, that's the mixer with the bowl lift instead of the tilt head, you have a spiral hook. It's far superior at kneading evenly, so there is no need to flip the dough over. Now let's give our dough a real workout. Crank up the speed to medium, speed 4 on KitchenAid, and knead for 4 minutes. This will give our dough strength and will result in a holy structure when we bake it. A big rookie mistake of beginner bakers that results in brick-like consistency is not kneading enough. Don't worry, there are more ways you can screw up your bread consistency later. But if you don't get this kneading stage done right, it's all downhill from there. By the end of kneading, you should see way less sticking to the bottom of the bowl. Now we need to let our dough rise. In a bakery, the mixer would be needed for something else, and you'd have to get a clean, lightly oiled container to move your dough to. But at home, I often rise my dough right in the mixer bowl to avoid extra dishes. Just pour a tiny bit of olive oil onto the walls and then lift the dough with the spatula to let the oil run under it. Be thorough to make sure the oil gets all the way to the bottom. Then dunk the towel in oil and oil the sides all the way up the bowl. The dough will rise a lot and we want to make sure we can get it out easily. Oil the top of the dough lightly with a spatula or your hand. If your dough moves easily when you shake the bowl, you are good. Cover the bowl with plastic wrap and let it rise in cool room temperature of 65 Fahrenheit to 75 Fahrenheit. Do not put this in a warm place, we want a very slow rise of roughly 4 hours to develop more flavor and elasticity. How long your rise will take will greatly depend on the temperature of your kitchen. So I would suggest you take a peek at the dough after 2 hours if your kitchen is very warm. Now that you've seen how to make this dough, let's understand what we've just made. All bread recipes can be converted into an easy formula called the baker's percentage. This way you can look at the recipe and immediately understand what the dough will feel like and how it will behave. The flour measurement in the baker's percentage is 100%. If you use 2 different flour types like I did today, you sum them up. Here's what our formula looks like. This is very typical for what we call a lean bread. Ciabatta, focaccia, baguette, country bread are all lean. They don't contain eggs, milk, butter, or oil. The most interesting number to look at here is the water percentage. 70% doughs feel very sticky. They are not the easiest doughs to work with if you are kneading by hand, but this high hydration gives us an opportunity for what we call an open crumb. Crumb is the term for the inside of the bread. Open crumb means airy with lots of holes, and closed crumb means dense. Another interesting number to look at is the yeast amount. Our yeast amount is extremely low compared to most breads. A typical sandwich loaf or pizza would have twice as much yeast. Home cooks are often so anxious about dough rising that they equate a quick rise with success. It's actually exactly the opposite when it comes to rustic breads. The slower your bread rises, the more the flour ferments. This results in more complex aroma, a bit more acidity, with much stronger gluten development. So what kind of a bread masterclass would this be if we didn't talk about preferments? Almost all serious bread books advocate that you make a preferment for your bread to improve its flavor and texture. You know, things like biga and poulish. Some people call them starters, but unlike sourdough starters, they are made with a tiny bit of commercial yeast a day or two before making the dough. The basic idea here is that you'll separate some flour and water from your dough and a tiny amount of yeast, mix them up and let them ferment at room temperature overnight. This allows a lot of fermentation to happen, resulting in a lot of flavor and gluten development. Then you add the rest of your ingredients and finish making your dough. Here's what I don't like about preferments. They require me to get out my scale and measure everything twice and to mix things twice. I'd rather get all that messy part over with once and for all, and if you give your dough 3 rises instead of 2, the flavor and texture will be just as good as if you made a preferment. Here's the schedule for your 3 rises. The first rise is happening right now. That's our 3 to 5 hour room temperature rise. After that, I'll fold the dough and place it in the fridge overnight to rise extremely slowly. It will eventually stop rising and can wait in the fridge for up to 5 days for you to bake it. Then I'll shape the dough and let it rise one more time before baking. This final rise after the dough is given its final shape is called the proof. I got the concept of 3 rises from Julia Child's baguette recipe in Mastering the Art of French Cooking. In case you're wondering why do most bakeries use preferments instead of 3 rises, here is my best guess. A bakery needs to be producing bread around the clock. Taking up huge buckets for days on end is not practical, but they can make a poulish or biga in much smaller containers to get the next batch of bread started. This way, they only need the big containers for 1 rise. This also results in a quicker proof since they are not pulling the dough out of the fridge. But what's convenient in a bakery is not always convenient at home. I put another batch of dough into a glass bowl to make it easier for you to see the size before and after the rise. Time is only a rough guideline. Go by the look. You want your dough to roughly triple. Sprinkle the work surface with flour. Loosen the dough from the sides with your fingers and turn it out onto the counter. The goal of this step is to remove the bubbles. That's carbon dioxide produced by yeast after digesting the starch in the flour. If you don't release these bubbles, the yeast will eventually suffocate and die. Scrape out the bowl and add these bits to the dough. If you see any oil, dab it up with a paper towel. Pat the dough flat. Fold it into thirds, patting it aggressively to get rid of all the bubbles. And then fold it into thirds the other way. If you encounter sticking, use a pastry scraper to help you. If you have too much flour on top of your dough, brush it off. This procedure is called a lattice turn, or to be more precise, 2 lattice turns since we did it twice. And it accomplishes 3 things. Gets rid of all the bubbles, stretches the dough, developing more gluten, and redistributes the yeast, giving it more starches to eat. At this point, you could return the dough to the big bowl, but since I know that I want to bake 2 focaccias out of it, I'll divide it in half and place each piece into a bowl that is 3 to 4 cups in capacity. Tuck the dough towards the middle, flip it over, and roll between your hands to shape into a ball. Place the balls into bowls, oil the top lightly, cover with plastic, and put in the fridge overnight or for up to 5 days. This gives me the flexibility to bake the 2 loaves on different days. Okay, we're finally ready to solve the mystery of the 2 focaccias. The difference between them is shaping. Here's how the flat focaccia was shaped. I simply dumped the dough into an oiled pan and stretched it out. For the second focaccia, I gave the dough 2 lattice turns, let it relax, and then stretched it out. Both focaccias rose for 3.5 hours before baking. I know what you're thinking. Why am I using 2 different pans? Couldn't the pan type make a difference? I've taught you well. You are absolutely right. You see, I only have 1 quarter sheet, and since I had to film it all in one day, I needed to use some other pan for the second focaccia. I have done this experiment in the quarter sheet using 2 different shaping methods on 2 different days and observed the same thing. Pre-shaping the dough with 2 lattice folds always results in puffier bread with lighter texture. But it is a bit more difficult. It requires you to be home during the 3-hour rise. Both focaccias were delicious, so if your schedule doesn't allow for the pre-shape step, do what I did with the first focaccia. Let's go through shaping step by step. Get the dough out of the fridge 3.5 hours before you plan to bake. Put 1 tablespoon of oil into a quarter sheet or an 11-inch cast iron skillet and spread it out. Sprinkle your work surface with flour. Loosen the dough from the sides of the bowl and invert it onto the work surface. It's important for the smooth top side to end up on the bottom. This will help you develop good surface tension. Flatten out the dough into the size of a printer page and fold it like a letter. Be aggressive with removing the bubbles. Fold it like the letter the other way and stretch it out the best you can. But be aware that after the folds it will not want to stretch because we woke up the gluten beast. Don't worry about it, we'll let it relax for 1 hour and then we'll be able to stretch it. Place it on an oiled baking sheet and cover with plastic. Okay, it's been an hour, so let's give it a go. Oil your hands and using flat fingers start stretching the dough. Every time I do this, I feel like something is going terribly wrong. I always feel like I've been here for 20 minutes and it's still not thin enough. But what's nice about the video is that I know exactly how much time I actually spent on this. About 2 minutes. They were 2 frustrating minutes, but they were totally worth it. It's okay to be very aggressive with this dough. You can even hang it off your fists and pull on it. It will always shrink some, but as long as it's about 1/2 inch thick, you are good. Cover it with plastic and let it rise 2 more hours. Just to review, the total rising time is 3 hours. Fold, wait an hour, stretch, wait 2 hours. If you won't be around after the first hour or just want a much simpler shaping method, place the dough smooth side up into an oiled pan and stretch it out. Without the letter folds, it will be way easier to stretch, but you know the trade-off in texture. Once it's half an inch thick, cover and let rise for 3 hours. When the dough is close to 1 inch or roughly twice as thick as it started, preheat the oven to 450 Fahrenheit with the racks in the middle and lower third of the oven. Give your oven 30 minutes to preheat. During the last 5 minutes, pour an inch of boiling water into a little pan and put it on the floor of the oven to steam it up. This will help the bread rise. I like to use a disposable aluminum pan for this, since this procedure is not very kind to your cookware. You can reuse the same pan many times. I think I've baked this one at least 20 times. If you have some flaky salt or Diamond Crystal Kosher Salt, sprinkle a tiny bit onto your focaccia. This is completely optional, and I would skip this step if you're sensitive to salt. If you want, sprinkle on some chopped rosemary, drizzle it with 1 tablespoon of oil. At this point, you need to be gentle with your dough. These are the bubbles we want to keep. Oil your fingers and make a few indents all the way to the bottom of the pan, spacing them evenly. Place focaccia in the middle of the oven, reduce the temperature to 425 Fahrenheit, turn on the convection fan if you have it, and bake for 12 to 16 minutes. I like to move my focaccia to the bottom rack for the last 4 minutes of baking to crisp up the bottom. How long it will take will depend on your oven, whether or not you're using a convection fan, and what cookware you're using. After the first 12 minutes, check every 2 minutes until you get this color. My quarter sheet was done in 14 minutes, but my cast iron pan needed 16. When your focaccia is nicely brown, you are done. Immediately drizzle it with another tablespoon of oil and get it out onto a cooling rack. You might think it's a lot of oil, but that's what it takes to make a good focaccia. This final drizzle softens the top crust and gives it delightful richness. I like my bottom crispy and the top soft. Cool for at least 20 minutes and enjoy. I think I should just shut up now and let you see the texture. Once you master this dough, the sky is the limit. You can use it to shape round loaves, ciabatta, baguettes, etc. This video is dedicated to my husband, Jason. Here is the story of bread baking in our family. While Jason was working on his PhD thesis at MIT, he caught the bread bug. It was the ultimate procrastination art form. I can't say I appreciated it back then. You see, I was waiting for him to graduate and get a real job so that I could quit my software job and become a full-time cooking instructor. And I really felt like my career was sabotaged by baguette. Little did I know that the bread bug is contagious, and even die-hard cooks like me are not immune to it. It was Jason who introduced me to weighing my ingredients and keeping a bread journal, and I hope now that I can pass that torch on to you, my dear viewers. Here are more very detailed tutorials for you to check out, and if you are ever in the Boston area, maybe I'll see you in one of my classes.